You're it.
I'm it. 5-4 in the dark. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for joining us today. I think you will have the pleasure this afternoon. I think you'll really enjoy this opportunity to speak to and hear from one of the foremost experts on Net Promoter System. Today we have with us RobMarkey, who's a partner with Bain. Has been with Bain for 27 years plus and has been in this space of customer loyalty for a tremendous amount of time and studies it every single day. In fact, I think this is probably the only person I've met who actually takes more surveys than I do. I tend to try everyone that comes across my desk. He goes a step further and screenshots them and studies them to ad nauseam. So I think he's done a fantastic job of deeply understanding the impact of motors versus tractors and driving overall impact on business. Not only has he spent 27 years with Bain, he spent a lot of time with senior executives, better understanding how to pull this through as well. And in fact, many of you probably read the book, The Ultimate Question 2.0. He's a co-author of the book as well, so you probably have that on your desk. So all the questions you may have had about what's in the book, you can ask Rob as well. He's been a partner of mine for the last year and a half as I've really tried to better understand how we can leverage Net Promoter System here at Lilly, and continues to push and challenge us as a company within this industry to figure out how best to leverage it to really differentiate ourselves in this marketplace. So without further ado, I bring up today RobMarkey. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
I'm a partner in Bain's New York office, and I've been a partner in our New York office for 20-some years. Problem is I live in Boston, so I travel every week from Boston to New York. And I'm on the same flight, 6 a.m. early in the week, and I'm on the same flight back home on Thursday night. And when you do that, when your commute is on a plane all the time, it's like any other commute. You get to know some of the other passengers, some of the flight attendants, the gate agents, even the pilots. Like, they just become the people that you commute with. A couple years ago, I'm on my way back from New York to Boston, and I see a gate agent who is clearly angry. She is frustrated, and she is taking it out on customers. And I think, wow, that's horrible. Like, these people are walking up to her, they've done nothing wrong, and she is just jumping down their throat. And you know what, when you see that, because we all see that happen in different retail environments, what's the first thing you think of? You think, that's a bad hire. Like, that person probably doesn't belong dealing with the public all the time. But the thing is that this particular case, this is somebody I'd seen for several years. I knew kind of who she was. And I thought, that's unusual. It was so unusual that I did what I often do. I took out my camera and I took a photo. So this is her. And she is saying to customers, give me that piece of paper, and why would you think I could do that? And the customers are cringing. And I'm thinking, I got to figure out what's happening here. So back in the background, you see the supervisor. It's the woman with the lanyard around her neck. And I walked around after I took the photo, and I asked her, what's going on? Why is she doing this? And the supervisor kind of rolled back on her heels and rolled her eyes, and she said, do you know what that job is like? Every day she walks in knowing that she's going to have to tell some number of passengers, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 passengers, that they can't get on a flight that's oversold. And I thought, wow, you know what? That is kind of tough. Because do you know what happens when a passenger shows up for a flight that they can't get on? Do you know the progression? You ever see this? The first thing that the passenger does is they say, they go through what, phase one, I call it begging. Please, can't you bump somebody else? I have to get to whatever, because the meeting I'm going to is really important, or I need to see my kids, or I'm going, whatever. It's a very important thing for me. And of course, she can't. So then they go up to, DEFCON 2. I'm an important customer. I'm a frequent traveler. I'm a platinum, ultra, whatever. I'm going to take my business somewhere else. And what happens? Can't do anything. So now they go to DEFCON 3. Like now it's like, listen, you jerk, let me on the plane. And they're screaming at this poor person. So what the supervisor was really saying here is, listen, this is a tough job. She takes the brunt of all these customers every day. And eventually, all of our gate agents go through this. They have a bad day. They kind of snap. So my job as the supervisor is to stand here, stay close, make sure she doesn't kill any of our passengers today. Tomorrow she'll come to work, she'll be fine. Let me ask you something. Whose fault is this? Bad employee? Bad supervisor? Wrong hiring practices? Where is the problem? Where's the breakdown here?
Oversold.
Yeah, the flight is oversold. I want to come back to this. I want to talk about this more in a second. But we need a name for her, and we need a name for this situation. So I'm going to give them one. It's kind of nasty. I'm going to call her Angry Lady, and I'm going to call her airline Angry Lady Airline, just so we can refer to it. So put that aside for a second. The next week, I'm on a flight from, where was I? I was in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm flying to JFK. Afternoon flight, I'm on JetBlue. And anybody, you're familiar with JetBlue? JetBlue is a nice airline. It's low cost. They have TVs on the seat backs. I think of it as a nice experience usually. So I'm on this flight. Several hours into the flight, I notice that we keep turning left, And if you fly a lot, you know exactly what's going on. Eventually, the captain comes on the PA system and says, ladies and gentlemen, there are thunderstorms over New York. We're in a holding pattern. When air traffic control releases us, we'll be able to go back in. Well, we keep doing this for a long time. And eventually, the captain comes back on the PA and says, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we're running out of fuel. We're going to have to land somewhere and refuel. So we end up at 10 o'clock at night in Rochester, New York, hundreds of miles from JFK. Now, we've been on this flight since 4:30 in the afternoon. We're hungry. I mean, all I've had is a Diet Coke and a bag of peanuts. And there are kids on this flight. We're all just kind of grumpy and grouchy, and you can feel the mood of the entire plane load of people is kind of low and yucky. We roll up to the gate. Captain comes out of the cockpit and addresses all of us and says, ladies and gentlemen, I have good news and bad news. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? That means I have bad news, and I'm going to pretend that there's something good about it. The good news is that we're ready for you. We're going to be able to refuel really quickly. We're going to get back in the air, and we'll be at JFK before midnight. The bad news is that because they're all ready and we're going to be so fast, I can't let you off the plane. And I know you all want to stretch. You might want to get something to eat. Can't do it. Anyway, in Rochester at 10 o'clock at night, there's nothing open. And you get this plane load of people who are grumpy to begin with, and you just feel it all deflate that much more. But then the captain says, so I called ahead to our ground crew, and I asked them if they could arrange for some pizzas. And sure enough, they bring pizza to the plane. And we go from depressed and bummed out to all of a sudden, it's like a party. I mean, I have been sitting on this plane for 4 or 5 hours. I don't even know how long. You're shoulder to shoulder with the guy who's next to you. I never looked him in the eye once because I didn't want to really have a conversation with him. I want to get some work done. And also because I want the armrest, right? Well, suddenly the pizza comes, we're like best buddies. Why were you in, Texas? What are you doing in New York? And the entire plane erupts into this kind of fiesta atmosphere. Now ask yourself a question. First of all, how do you get pizza to an airplane at a gate at an airport? Right? Does a captain just like pull out his cell phone at 30,000 feet and call a pizza place? No. He calls the ground crew, whose job has nothing to do with getting pizza. They, in turn, find a pizza place that will take a set of pizzas through security, that's not easy, to a gate. Like they have to arrange that somehow. And then somebody pays them. You think that would have happened on Angry Lady Airline? There was some creativity that was, I mean, some enthusiastic employees did something really weird and it turned out great. Anybody have little kids? You know what it's like to travel with little kids? It's fun, right? Like, especially infants. My kids are older now. They're at this point 17 and 13, so this is a bit of a fading memory. But every time I see a family that has little kids, my heart goes out to them. It's difficult to travel that way. So imagine when I saw this family. I had to take a photo, right? So here you've got mom, and she is with 2 toddlers. She's got a stroller, her purse, 2 rolling bags, a diaper bag, an infant in a car seat. Oh, here's Dad's belly. And they've got their coats. Those 2 adults are going to get all that stuff onto this plane. Now, this happened to be on Angry Lady Airline again, the same exact airline. This time I was on my way from Boston to Atlanta. And I get on, you know how the announcements work? So you're sitting, everybody's sitting in the gate area. These guys are sitting in the gate area. And they do the kind of pre-boarding announcement. You know, in just a minute, we're going to start boarding. What happens at that point? Everybody stands up. And where do they go? They crowd around the gate area. And then they say, we'd like to pre-board, give a few minutes to those people who need a little extra time, people traveling with infants, blah, blah, blah. They wait about a beat of 2. And our frequent flyers and our first class and all that. So before these guys can even get out of their seat, people like me are on the plane. So I'm on the plane, sitting, maybe 2/3 of the way back on the aisle. Behind me in the galley, the Angry Lady flight attendants are doing exactly what flight attendants always do as a plane is boarding. They're talking about stuff. They're getting to know each other, talking about the union, about their roots, about, whatever they, right? I mean, you're laughing because you've overheard exactly this conversation, right? Eventually, I see mom and dad and the toddlers kind of, trudging their way up the aisle. And occasionally, the flight attendants will like peek out the back, or up the aisle, and sort of say, "Hey, is anything going on there? Is everything okay?" And they'll go back to their conversation. So they see this family, and they go back to their conversation. And the family eventually makes their way to their seat. Partway down the flight, a business person takes pity on the mom, who is carrying the car seat and she's got the infant in one arm and the car seat in the other, and offers to carry the car seat. He ends up at the back of the plane like a salmon trying to swim upstream to get back to his seat. But I didn't really think much of it. It just happened, and it was weird, but whatever. I'm on another flight, this time on JetBlue, and I watch something much less extreme. It's just a mom. She's got a baby. She's got the diaper bag. She has the car seat and the infant, and she's trudging her way. The JetBlue flight attendants are doing exactly the same thing in the back. They're having their conversation about stuff, occasionally peering up the aisle to make sure everything's okay. But they stop their conversation, and one of them rushes forward and talks to mom. And they have some conversation up ahead of me that I can't hear. And suddenly, this happens. The flight attendant has the baby. And she's walking around playing with the baby and making the baby laugh and introducing the baby to the other passengers, and all the other passengers are kind of getting a kick out of it. Meanwhile, mom has her hands free to get herself settled into the seat, get the car seat settled, and then baby goes back into mom's arms and everybody's happy. I thought that was remarkable. It was kind of interesting. The whole plane kind of got involved in this. I wasn't quick enough to take a photo. So it turns out this is a photo that somebody else, an audience member in one of my speeches took, and said, "Hey, you know what? I saw the same thing. You should And on JetBlue, you should use that. Why do they take a picture of this? Say it again?
It's remarkable.
It's remarkable. It's really unusual. But it's more than that. There's something human and emotional going on here. Remarkable things happen. You don't take a picture. You don't think about them again. But there was something really fascinating to everybody on the plane about this. You're a mom. Angry lady comes up to you, asks you for the baby. You give it to her? No. So what has to happen here? This has to be a genuine interaction, somebody who is really caring and human. It doesn't there's no script at JetBlue that says, if you see a mom carrying a baby, you must go up and grab the baby out of their arms. It can't work that way. Why is it that JetBlue's employees are consistently enthusiastic and genuine and creative on behalf of their customers? And Angry Lady Airlines cannot get anything like that out of their employees. That is the subject of my entire career, trying to figure out the difference between companies like that. So how do you get to be Apple or Lego or American Express or JetBlue, one of these loyalty leading companies whose employees are so enthusiastic and creative that they do really amazing things on behalf of customers, and then in turn create customer bases who are amazingly enthusiastic and creative back? Now, if you've ever heard my partner, Fred Reichheld, talk about this stuff, he talks about it in almost religious terms. In fact, he talks about this kind of behavior, the behavior exhibited by the JetBlue flight attendant or the pilot, is golden rule behavior. It's just what you do when you're human. There are other reasons, though, to try to become a loyalty leader than being a good person. Because I do really believe that doing good in the world will ultimately pay off. But let's face it, we're in business and we're all metrics oriented. Turns out loyalty leaders also grow about 2.5 times faster than their competitors. Now, why is that? It's because the loyalty leaders get their customers to stay longer, to buy more, and to tell their friends. 3 things that drive value. So let's visualize this. You get 2 companies, right? Loyalty leader and the average company. Loyalty leader keeps lots of their customers. The average company loses a bunch. They both grow by the same amount. Next year, loyalty leader keeps most of their customers. Average company loses more. Grow a little again. And this keeps happening year after year, and just the gap in the number of customers expands over time. So they stay longer. Second, they buy more. So each of those customers is also buying significantly more from the loyalty leader, multiplying that effect out. And then they tell their friends, which means that more people are coming in, more new customers are coming in, basically for free, all the time. So massive growth advantage for a loyalty leader. Think it costs more to be a loyalty leader, to earn that kind of loyalty? Don't you have to be premium in order to do that? There's sort of a yes, no, maybe, right? Well, it turns out, on average, loyalty leaders have a cost advantage over their competitors of about 15%. That surprises a lot of people. You say, why is that? Well, first of all, there's the obvious part. If loyalty leader versus the average company, loyalty leader doesn't have to close this gap in number of customers through marketing, through new customer acquisition, through sales efforts, through promotions. Then there's some operating costs associated with customer churn. There's things like every time you onboard a new customer, there's typically cost associated with that. In addition, the very things that create attrition, that make customers go away, tend to be problems that have to get resolved in the service organization. So service costs are typically higher for the average company than they are for the loyalty leader. And they're wacky things. Well, employee turnover. It's not fun to be angry lady, right? So their turnover tends to be higher for the people who are dealing with those angry customers. Or imagine this. You get into financial trouble. You have to make a decision about which of the various suppliers you deal with you pay and which ones you delay payment. Who do you pay first? Company you hate or company you love? Credit losses are lower for loyalty leaders than they are for the average company. So for all these reasons, it's really advantageous to be a loyalty leader. And yet, you look at company after company, and they don't behave in ways that are consistent with that. They enrage customers. They overbook flights. Why? The reason is, honestly, it's sitting right in front of us. It's because the lenses through which we look at our businesses are the lenses of our accounting systems. And accounting is really good at putting together costs at the department or function level, because that's how we manage those costs. It's good at aggregating revenue by product or by geography. But what it doesn't do well is put together economics at the individual customer level and help you think about lifetime value of a customer and the impact of actions you take on that lifetime value. We talk about how we manage our businesses to quarterly results. Well, customer loyalty plays out over multiple years. The tools we have for managing current period profit in functions and departments are very well developed. And the tools that we have for managing customer value are ad hoc. Think about this. Have you ever heard of anyone going to jail for failing to recognize their revenues appropriately or for fudging their accounting? Yeah, people go to jail for that all the time. Anybody ever hear of somebody going to jail for fudging their customer satisfaction metrics? We just don't have the same standards around that. And so a lot of what we've done at Bain over the years is we've worked to try to strengthen the toolkit for managing customers and loyalty so that it is equal to, or at least on similar standing with, the tools for managing the P&L. And I spent many years of my career developing more and more refined customer lifetime value metrics, predictive models of customer attrition, all these things that are really useful for quantifying the impact of decisions you make about how to better treat customers and turning those into economic value. And we would do work for our clients and get them to make investments and do all these things that were really successful. Problem was the half-life on a lot of those projects was relatively short. The people who had been involved in the project really understood it and they could, replicate it and keep it going. But eventually, if it was successful, they got promoted. They went on to other jobs. And new people would come into these roles without the same experience, and they would be looking at the same old reports that came out of the accounting system and say, boy, that's right there. People are holding me accountable to that. This ad hoc thing over here, I'm not really sure I understand it that well. And eventually, it would fade away. So the challenge that we had was trying to figure out, how do you do something enduring? How do you get a company that is trying to become a loyalty leader to behave in ways that they can replicate over and over and over again? And we set out on a quest to try to figure out what the enduring loyalty leaders were doing that was different. And in that quest, we stumbled across Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And the CEO of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, paraphrasing, basically said, listen, you guys got all these wonderfully complicated metrics and ways of identifying customer loyalty and doing all this stuff. And we need all that. That's all great, whatever. As the CEO of a big company with 100,000 employees spread all over the place in little offices all over the world, pretty much useless to me. And you say, my life's work is pretty much useless to you, thank you. He said, look, the thing that has had the biggest impact on changing the culture of this organization has been simplifying this all down to a single, simple objective. We want to create more wows, more customers who are excited about coming to Enterprise and who bring back their friends. That's it. And we measure that. And we hold people accountable to that. And we give people feedback in the moment on the extent to which they accomplished that. And by keeping it that simple, now we have every employee in the whole organization pulling in the same direction. And I don't have to tell everybody what to do every day. And in fact, their creativity is far greater than what I could accomplish. So we said, this is great. We should try to find something very similar to what they're doing. And we set out to find the one question that we could ask customers that would yield a similar kind of thing to what enterprise was using. So we tried a whole bunch of different questions, and what we found was one question in particular, more often than not, predicted whether customers would stay longer, buy more, tell their friends, the things that create value. And that question was, how likely would you be to recommend our product, our service, our brand to your friends, your colleagues, your family members? Some version of that turned out to be the best. We further found that if we did this on a 0 to 10 scale, we could reliably identify people who gave 9s and 10s as what we now call promoters. People who really do actively recommend you, but more important, they themselves stay longer and buy more. And then people who are giving the 0s through 6s turn out to be what we now call detractors. They do just the opposite. And then in the middle are a group that we call passives. They're not neutral, by the way. Some people call them neutral. They're not neutral. Neutral means like indifferent. Actually, passives are quite satisfied. Here's the difference. I have a friend from college who I hadn't seen in a long time. I went to dinner with him. I think we're going to be talking about our careers, our families, all this kind of fun stuff. No. He wants to talk about this thing that at the time I'd never heard of called an Apple TV. And in my mind's eye, I'm picturing like a television. It's actually a little puck about this big. And he spends 20 minutes trying to convince me that I have to get an Apple TV. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I don't know. And he's, you're not really going to do this, are you? I'm like, okay, maybe not. I'll tell you what. I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to install one in your house. You use it for 2 months. If you like it, pay me. If you don't like it, I'll come take it and I'll use it. That's a promoter. Right? Now, I have this thing. My kids use it all the time. I use it all the time. I am super satisfied with it. I like this a lot. If you ask me, do you like your Apple TV? I say, yes. Have I ever stopped a conversation to say, listen, you got to... No, I haven't. I wouldn't. I mean, is there anything I can think of that would make an Apple TV better so that I could do that? No. I can't think of anything that would make it better. It's great. So I'm a passive. I'm fully satisfied, but I'm not a promoter. And this concept, this simple concept of a promoter versus a passive versus a detractor turns out to be hugely powerful in an organization because everybody can close their eyes and picture what one of those people is like. Now, we can also quantify the extent to which they really do stay longer, buy more, tell their friends. So in every case, we do that. This happens to be an insurance company where we measure the churn, do they stay longer? We measure the cross-sell, do they buy more? And we measure the revenue that comes from referrals. Do they tell their friends, and does that then generate additional revenue for the business? And indeed, on every dimension it does, which allows you to calculate differences in lifetime value. It allows you to do business cases on improvements that you make and figure out what is it worth to move somebody from being a detractor to being a promoter and satisfy our accounting needs, right? So that part can still be done even though we've simplified the metric down to a single question. We also wanted to test this on strategic grounds and ask the question, well, if you get a company that consistently creates more promoters and fewer detractors, does it grow faster than its competitors? And the first thing we did is just take that 0 to 10 scale, calculate an average, and say, well, if a company achieves an average of 7.8, does it grow faster than a different company that has 6.0? And when we did the correlation, you could actually explain a significant amount of the variation in competitive growth rates as a result of differences in their average likelihood to recommend. That was good. But a junior person on one of our teams pointed out that we were doing a straight average that was ignoring the impact of detractors on the business. And they said, you know, what if we just did a transformation on the data? We subtract the detractors from the promoters and come up with some net score, would that better explain variations? And sure enough, that's what led us to the net promoter score. So this whole idea of the net score really came from this, trying to explain strategic differences. And in fact, a further refinement we've done in the last couple of years is we now look at relative net promoter score, which is comparing your net promoter score to the net promoter scores of your direct competitors as measured in double-blind market research. So that all actually works out really well. Now, it was on the basis of this set of insights, that we published an article in the Harvard Business Review in 2003. And it was a surprisingly popular article. It was called One Number You Need to Grow. And some guys at a company called General Electric stumbled across this. Now, the reason it was significant at General Electric is because at GE, they're a big Six Sigma company. And they were struggling back in the early 2000s to apply Six Sigma not just to manufacturing, where Six Sigma was developed, but also to sales and service operations. And the problem is that in sales and service, there is no clear definition of a defect. I made a successful sale. How could that be a defect? I fixed the machine. How could that be a defect? So it turned out to be their healthcare business, where they do MRI machines and X-ray machines and all that, and they sell them into hospital systems. And these guys took this and said, we're going to try to apply Six Sigma using Net Promoter as the outcome metric. And it was really successful. So they became one of the very first companies to adopt Net Promoter Score along with Intuit, which, by the way, was being run by some former GE guys. Well, guess what happens when GE adopts something? It becomes really popular really fast. So we went from just a couple of companies to suddenly hundreds and then thousands of companies using Net Promoter Score. And in the meantime, we had been building our list of success stories, Bain clients that we've been working with, and in every case, really wonderful results, just like had happened at GE or Intuit or some of the other companies that we were working with. And we were like, yeah, this is great. We know enough now. We should write a book about this. Well, lesson learned. Until you have failures, you don't actually know why something succeeded. So what we did is we wrote a book in 2006 that was all about the successes, but we hadn't examined any failures. It was a great book. It was wrong in some cases. We spent the last few years examining failures and comparing them to successes to try to figure out what distinguishes the successes from the failures. Because there were companies coming to us and saying, we did this thing and we got nothing. Three things emerged that are absolutely always true in the successes and rarely true in the failures. First, in the successes, they have systematically created a reliable outcome metric. When they designate a customer as a promoter, that customer really behaves like a promoter. Detractor behaves like a detractor, and that shows up in their financial performance. They can really measure and say, yep, you know what? Detractors buy less, they stay less, they tell their friends bad stuff about us, and promoters do just the opposite. There was an insurance company came to us. They said, we look at likelihood to recommend. We try to correlate likelihood to recommend with our insurance customers, how long do they stay as customers, and can we cross-sell to them, and do they generate referrals? And we're not really getting strong correlations. And we said, boy, that's funny, because we've done this in insurance and we've seen it. I wonder what's going on here. Explain to us how you're collecting. Well, in our claims operation, this is an auto insurance company. In our claims operation, when somebody has a claim that's paid, it triggers a survey, and we ask the customer, how likely would you be to recommend? We ask them why. We correlate that with their subsequent behavior, and we get crummy results. We said, hold on for a second. How do you trigger the survey? Well, every time a claim is paid, yeah, but don't you deny claims ever? What do you do with those? Oh, well, we thought about that. We only ask the people whose claims are paid because the other people are really angry and we don't need to ask them. Here's the most important thing. So that having a reliable metric turns out to be really important. But the most important distinction is that the successes use this to create high velocity, closed loop learning, feedback, and action systems. That's a lot of consulting jargon. What does that mean? The traditional way that we collect feedback from customers goes something like this. I have let's call it a customer service rep in a call center. I want to get this person feedback. So what I do is I collect up feedback from a sample of the customers that this person has spoken with over the course of, say, a month. And I aggregate that so that I can calculate a score so that I can compare this person to other reps around the system and explain differences in this person's performance versus the average, and I can come up with driver analysis and all that kind of stuff, right? So if it's now May, I would say to him, hey, we've got your customer feedback scores, and it turns out that you are an 8.3. That's below the 8.9 goal that we have, and it's below the reps of similar tenure. And oh, by the way, we've got all this analysis that we've done, and we find that your product knowledge score is lower than the average, and your empathy score is lower than the average. And he says, yeah, okay, and we work on that, will you? And what's he really saying? What he's, the internal thing in his mind is going like, okay, product knowledge isn't as good as the other reps. Like, I know the products back and forward. Those customers are just idiots. Like, I'm good at this. And anyway, I'm empathetic, damn it. Right? Imagine we gave feedback to the people in our lives the same way we give feedback to employees. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I want her to use better table manners. So her name is Rachel. So I say at the end of the month, I do exactly what I just did with Rachel. Last month, you only said thank you 24% of the time. That's down from 28% the month before, and it's below the 35% that other 13-year-olds in our part of the country seem to achieve. You need to improve. Is she going to improve her table manners? It's obvious. It's obvious when you put it into human terms. Why do we think that the human beings who are in our call centers, our sales organizations, our service organizations, our product development organizations are any different? So in a closed loop system, what we do is instead of aggregating all the data and calculating scores and all that stuff and only revealing it in that form, we take every single customer that he interacts with who gives feedback, and we hand the feedback directly to this employee within a time frame that he can still remember that interaction. And now it becomes individual. It's the same as with my daughter. I don't wait until the end of the month. I say on the spot, hey, you didn't say thank you. That's how you learn. That's how humans learn. You take an action, you observe the outcome of that action, the score that you got from the customer, the reasons why. You formulate opinions about what you did that created that outcome. You create hypotheses about how you could do differently the next time. Then you do it again and you observe the outcome the next time. That's learning. So in a high-velocity closed-loop learning system, we're giving the feedback individually right away to these customer-facing employees. That's closing the loop between the customer and the employee. But we also close the loop a different direction. We close the loop between the company and the customer. So this customer says, listen, I wasn't that excited about the interaction that I had. It wasn't that good. In fact, I had some problems. Well, the way we normally collect feedback from people, think about this, in the relationships we have with our customers, we say, thank you very much. Your feedback is important to us. And that is it. That is the last time they ever hear about that. Because it's research. They're anonymous. We're not allowed to go back and talk to them. Relationship. That's how we manage a relationship, we say, with our customer. Think about the relationships in your life. Let's say she's my wife. And I say, honey, how are things going? She says, well, honestly, they're not that good. You're always on the road talking about your darn book. When you come home, you're jet-lagged and tired. You're always on your darn BlackBerry. You leave your dishes in the sink, your clothes on the floor. You don't walk the dog. I'm angry. Thank you very much. Your feedback is important to me. Am I going to stay married? Are you going to keep a customer behaving like that? Does that make any sense at all? It should be obvious. But somehow we've obscured that, right? So in the Net Promoter System, we go back to a customer who has an issue and we say, hey, listen, I heard you had something going on. Can you explain it to me? Can we talk about it? She says, well, the rep really wasn't that great. It didn't know the products, wasn't very empathetic. And I say, wow, thank you so much for telling me that. If it's okay with you, I'd like to share that feedback with the rep and help coach the rep on how to do better. And we talk a little bit more. And then she reveals something else. She says, and by the way, this product I got a couple of weeks ago, it's not working. And so I'm already, oh, well, let me deal with that. And suddenly, we're having an interaction that is enhancing the relationship with that individual customer. That's the closed loop of the Net Promoter System. The third thing is the successful companies, their strategy is to grow the business profitably and sustainably by earning the loyalty of their customers. In the unsuccessful companies, who knows what their strategy is, but their goal is to improve their score. So what do? They say, let's improve our score. Let's give everybody a goal for improving their Net Promoter Score. Let's put it into their compensation. You 10%, you 20% because you're really low. You 50%. And what do these guys do? They go to their staff and they say, listen, we need better scores. So they go to the rep and they say, listen, let me explain this to you. 9s and 10s, that's what we need. So what does the rep do? I need 9s and 10s. I'm being compensated on this. Customer, you're going to get a survey. Please. Car dealers do this all the time. Yes. That's evidence that they're not doing this to earn the loyalty of their customer. They just want the better score. So in a Net Promoter company, and a company that's doing it really well, they say, listen, our goal is to earn the loyalty of our customers, get them to stay longer, buy more, tell their friends. We can predict whether we're being successful at that based on whether our Net Promoter Score is improving. We can learn how to do it better using our Net Promoter System. But we're not going to be focused on the number because the number is not the point. It's just evidence of success. That's not the goal. The goal is something deeper. Now, we also learned, as we went through this, that every successful company, in order to achieve these three things, they were using a system. There was a set of operating processes that were behind this, system processes that they were employing. And it turns out there are 8 of these. They go by different names in different companies, but every company that was successful had some version of each of these 8 things in place. And they were using this to generate insights that helped shape their customer strategy and ultimately change the behavior of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of employees all over the world. To do what to create employees who are more like the JetBlue flight attendant and pilot and less like Angry Lady. In hindsight, I so wish that we had called NPS the Net Promoter System from day one rather than Net Promoter Score. Because it's the system that creates all the value. The score is a contributor to that system. In fact, it's the little box in the upper left-hand corner of the system processes is the score. We've also learned a few things about how to operationalize the Net Promoter System. So for example, we learned to distinguish between what we now call competitive benchmark Net Promoter Scores and customer scores. And then we further learned to distinguish between touch point triggered feedback and relationship feedback. Competitive benchmark is really meant to help you understand where you are versus your competitors so that you can set goals, you can set strategy, you can set priorities for the organization. You do it as double-blind market research out in the marketplace with not only your customers but with competitors' customers. They don't know it's you. You don't know who they are. You ask them a whole bunch of questions. You find out what your score is versus the competitors. Why? That's a really powerful motivator for change. Customer relationship NPS is your customers asking them, what's it like to do business with us? How likely would you be to recommend us? And it powers that high-velocity closed loop. Same thing with Touchpoint, where Touchpoint is all about the interactions that customers are having and how to improve those. The reason this is important, this distinction, is because goal setting has to be really at the highest level, needs to be based on doing better than your competitors. Let me illustrate that. This is from a company that does domestic appliances and personal care, right? So what they do is every single division in the business is plotted as a triangle on this chart, and their Net Promoter Score goes from left to right. And then what you've got is the gray line is the spread of their competition. So you've got the worst over on the left, the best over on the right. And we group each of the divisions based on whether they're leading their competition, whether they're lagging their competition, or whether they're basically at parity. So here's a question for you. Which of these two divisions is doing better? The one at the top of the page that has a positive 25 Net Promoter Score, or the one at the bottom of the page that has a negative 8? The one at the bottom? That's right. So even though the one at the bottom has more detractors than they have promoters, which, by the way, objectively is bad, they're still doing better than the one at the top that has more promoters than they have detractors. Why? Because the one at the bottom is leading its competitors. It's the least bad. It's the least denigrated in its group. And the one at the top is the least recommended. And it turns out that in this company's businesses, being the laggard, being the least recommended in your business, you grow 5 percentage points slower than your market. Being the most recommended in your business, you grow 8 percentage points faster. That's a big difference. Competitive NPS is what matters. Similarly, we learned about with customer relationship NPS, especially in B2B settings, it matters how you collect the data and from whom. So in a typical B2B setting, you think about all the different people at all the different parts of the organization from whom you could collect information. The tendency is to find the one person that you collect that you do the most business with and get them to respond to your survey. Well, it turns out that there are a lot of people who influence these decisions, so you have to collect feedback from a lot of them. A lot of people are satisfied with like a 50% response rate from things like this. So let's simulate that. This is what happened in one of our real clients. They got a 47% response rate in the first wave of their survey. And the results came back like this, and that aggregates in that account to a 62% NPS. And you say, you know what, that's not bad. Then they did a reminder, and they tried to get more people to respond, and they got 8% more people to respond. So they went from 47% response to 55. And here's what happened. Boom. Their NPS drops to 40. Now, if you were doing like league tables and rank ordering, suddenly this is much lower in the rankings. And in fact, if you cut it a different way and you just look at the decision makers rather than the people who are kind of using the product at the bottom of the page, you might come to a completely different conclusion about what the Net Promoter Score is in that account. Now, you're saying to yourself right now, well, wait a minute, I thought he just got done telling us that we need to get a reliable metric. And I'm saying, yeah, you do. Until you have 100% response, you don't really know quite what the account level NPS is. So, account level NPS is like interesting, but it's not that helpful. In fact, in B2B settings, what we now talk about is NPS is a relationship management tool for the account team. And it's really most valuable when thinking about that high velocity closed loop. So imagine you've got a detractor somewhere in the organization and they get promoted into the job above them. What happens? What if they're replacing your most important promoter? The score at the account level doesn't matter anymore because the decision maker is somebody who doesn't like you. So we use the Net Promoter System in an environment like this to identify individual customers and take action so that we can either turn the detractors into at least passives or leverage the promoters in the account to help overwhelm the negative impact of detractors. to do that, you have to have system infrastructure. So in every company, we actually set up very specific ways to get the data moving around the organization. So we trigger surveys and get them in the right places. In the traditional way, remember we were talking about the traditional way of gathering feedback, the design element, the thing around which you design the entire system is the statistics. You want averages and statistics that you can do analysis against. In a Net Promoter System, the design element that you're designing around is the individual. So this frontline learning and customer recovery loop is the primary objective, getting the feedback directly from customers to the employee who needs to hear it and taking action with that customer to do something about it. And as a secondary output, we also do team, function, process, organizational learning and analysis. We flip the traditional model on its head, which means that the whole system has to be geared around that, and the way we collect data has to be different, the way we share data has to be different, the way people action data has to be different. Because we're trying to harness the energy of thousands of individual employees. We talk about this, sorry, I'm going to flip through this. We talk about this as really focusing the organization on the things that matter, individuals. Now, when you've got a detractor, what has caused that? Typically, it's you have a product or a service that's not meeting their basic needs at a reasonable price. You're not delivering the way you promised or the way competitors or other companies have led them to expect. And or you're not recovering from the inevitable problems that come up. And our tendency is to focus on defect elimination in Net Promoter. You know, like we got detractor, let's go tackle that. That's important. If you eliminate 100% of the defects, will you earn loyalty from customers? Congratulations, sir. You can get on that flight that you bought a ticket for. Is he going to go out and tell all his friends to fly Angry Lady Airline now? No defect. Right? You need to go beyond that. We need to do something more than just eliminate defects. We need to differentiate. Now, differentiation is a term. It's a big word that people throw around, and it's become a buzzword. Nobody knows what it means. It comes from one of two things, or both. You deliver the ordinary stuff, the same stuff your competitors deliver, in an extraordinary way, or you deliver things that your competitors just don't do. So go back to the airline example. Every airline boards flights. So it's ordinary to board a flight, but doing it in a genuine way, a caring way that results in passengers handing their babies over, that's extraordinary. JetBlue does something else to differentiate. They spent millions of dollars putting televisions on the seat backs with DirecTV so you can flip the channels yourself. No other airline in the US does that for free. That is an extraordinary service. And does it always work? Anybody fly JetBlue when it doesn't always work, but it's something that you remember and you tell your friends because it's different and better. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about the employees, which are basically an investment of management time, or the televisions, which are an investment of dollars. Either way, these are reflections of customer strategy. Every company that we work with who is successful here identifies distinct segments of customers who they want to understand better than their competitors do so they can offer value propositions that are differentially better than what the competitors offer, thereby attracting more target segment customers at lower cost, offer those customers a better experience than they expected or than they can get from their competitors, earn the right to do more business with those customers and get behavioral loyalty, and ultimately earn the emotional commitment of those customers for the company's success. And by doing that, they earn more profit per customer than their competitors do, which gives them more cash to reinvest in better products, in more customer acquisition, in better customer experiences, and it creates this virtuous circle that they can leverage for economic and strategic advantage. And you look at every one of these loyalty leaders that we studied, and every one of them has found pieces of their customer strategy to emphasize, places where they're going to be dramatically different and better than those competitors. Now, there's a tendency to think about this from the perspective of what you can do from here in headquarters. The easy stuff to do, the fast stuff to do is the levers that you can pull from here. But the truth is that our organizations consist of thousands of people all around the world executing the things that we want them to do. And if you really want to be successful, you have to have enthusiastic employees. So let's just think about this for a minute. What is it like to be Angry Lady? When you board a flight of 100 or so people and you have a 25% net promoter score, these are the faces of the passengers that you're putting on the plane. You got about 40 of them are promoters, you got a bunch of passives, and you got about 15 detractors. If you're at JetBlue or you're at Apple in their retail stores and you have a 75% net promoter score, these are the faces of the customers that you're dealing with. Here's a test. Which of these two places would you rather work? Now flip this around to the customer's perspective. We can measure the employee net promoter score. So we do that. We ask employees, how likely would you be to recommend this as a place to work? How likely would you be to recommend our products or services to people that were, relevant? And we find that on average, you get like a 20% net promoter score among employees. So your employees' faces look a little bit like this. 30 promoters, 10 detractors, a whole bunch of passives. How likely is it that this group of employees creates that group of customers in any kind of sustainable way? This is what we call the promoter flywheel. It's the recognition that if you want customers who are enthusiastic about doing business with you, you have to earn that through employees who are energetic and excited and committed and innovating on those customers' behalf, approaching the job with excellence and doing things that really are genuine and true. And the truth is that only in situations where employees can be successful in earning the advocacy of their customers, do they get fired up like that. So it's this virtuous cycle. Each side has to be there. You cannot attack one without attacking the other. Now you might be saying, okay, you painted an interesting picture. How does a company get from here to there? And the answer is, it takes time. Most companies go through multiple phases over time. They typically look something like this. There is a period of time where you're building the case, you're building the foundation and the fact base, and it's essentially establishing the case for a strategy built on customer loyalty, identifying some of the levers and actions that you can take. You then go into a pilot phase where you try it out. You create the high-velocity closed loops. You create the learning systems around those, the business processes, but you do it on a small scale so that you can figure out what works, what doesn't work, and ultimately come up with a program for scaling it through the whole organization. There's a rollout, and then typically several years later, there's a reinvigoration, because most organizations get to a certain plateau and they need to reattack it. It's hard work. We tell people who come up, we say, listen, don't go down this path unless you're really committed to this as a strategy, unless you really believe that it's strategically important to earn your customers' loyalty, because without that, it's not worth this level of effort over this period of time. It's also really rewarding on the other hand. There's a CEO of one of the companies we work with, a guy named Lanham Napier. He's at Rackspace, and they do web hosting. And he says, the benefit here is tremendous, because what I want is a self-correcting, self-directing organization. He said, I've stopped calling it NPS. I now call it GPS. Why? Because I can give every one of my thousands of employees a GPS in the form of their Net Promoter Score. And they can become self-correcting and self-directing. They always know which way it is to greatness, and they know how far they have to go to get there. And that is far more powerful than anything I could tell them to do, because they will be more creative in finding their path than I would ever be able to be. So my biggest hope for you is that you can use the Net Promoter System as your GPS for your organization and create a truly great company. Thank you.